think differently. The fourth area I would argue is the most effective organizations to address cybersecurity may not, in fact, be centralized. The U.S. government, as it approaches a problem, often wants command and control, centralization. Certainly, we need a coordinator across federal agencies and for the United States to look after cybersecurity. But when it comes down to actual cyber defense, a stealthier approach may in fact be more appropriate. Forming cells that are understanding what is actually happening, what attacks are underway, and those cells, those common interest units actually going and working together to address a problem. 2 points in this space. Number one, the e-commerce community is taking on attacks on a continuous basis. They're individually trying to work these issues and on an ad hoc basis working collectively with others. It's important to try to see their way through as to how they can actually handle these issues. And in this context, I want to draw people's attention to a book that was actually written a couple of years ago by a fellow by the name of Rod Beckstrom and a co-author, Ari Brofman. It's called The Starfish and the Spider. And the essence of what they're talking about is the unstoppable power of leaderless organizations. So in other words, in the cyberspace day and age, if you have centralized structures that are working on cyber defense, and the bad guys can identify those structures, they'll obviously attack those structures. They'll try to get inside. They'll try to understand what's going on. Well, Rod Beckstrom's comment is, well, perhaps it's better to be more fluid in our organization, if you will, less organized in our organization. And he goes back in time and looks at history. If you go back into the Spanish activities within South America, going after various empires, the Mayans, for example, they were able to lop off the top. Cortez was able to lop off the head of the Mayan Empire because, in fact, it was easily definable. But when the Spanish ultimately went after the Apaches in what is now New Mexico, they met with real problem because there was an identifiable head. It was leaderless. And so when we think about cyberspaces, we need to think about how do we defend in cyberspace that is you don't have necessarily a definable head of the organization, your common command and control network. We may, in fact, need to redefine the rules and our understanding as to how we actually go after this. The fifth point, don't address just today's problems. Today's problems we're focused on data loss. It's sensitive personal information, it's intellectual property, it's economic information, it's national security information. But the next wave was right behind this, and that's going to be data manipulation. That's when somebody comes into your networks and quietly adjusts the data. And it's very difficult to understand what exactly has happened. What happens if people start or attackers start manipulating your data? Then you lose confidence in the information you operate on every day. That will have massive implications for the United States, for society as it operates, economic and national security. Data manipulation is something we need to start thinking about today. The sixth problem I would identify is we need a cadre of well-educated people, cybersecurity experts, if you will, with a robust cybersecurity agenda. And this will be talked about in the panel in greater detail. Corey will be up on the line. He spent a lot of time on this. In fact, Chris is IBM ISS is actually putting money behind PhD students at Georgia Tech to look at some of the other problems like VoIP that need to be addressed. But we need to have a robust R&D agenda. We need to have experts in order to fulfill that agenda. If we don't have the experts, we're going to have a hard time fulfilling that agenda. The seventh issue I would highlight is government procurement. Karen Evans at the Office of Management and Budget deserves a lot of credit for trying to form lines of businesses around various issues. She's tried to work on a security line of business, and that is a start. But we need to change the paradigm across the federal government when it comes to procurement of security products. Let me give you an example with regard to encryption. Right now, we have a mandate that data on mobile products or mobile devices such as laptops needs to be encrypted. So that means everything on a stationary device potentially could be unencrypted. That seems silly. Absolutely silly. Why don't we have a government-wide mandate that all data, except that data which is designated to be unclassified, should be encrypted? Doesn't make sense. And there are other areas where we could pursue, especially with regard to identity management, where we could have more significant mandates on security across government. The eighth area I would highlight is expanding cross-border cooperation, and I want to go back to the e-commerce companies in this case. Very large companies are experiencing attacks, and when they turn to the federal government for assistance, often the federal government cannot respond because it doesn't have the resources or it doesn't have the capability to respond effectively. Now that we're waking up to the problem, I think there are things that even the State Department can do. I would encourage the State Department to establish a cyber attaché program. Those of you who are familiar with the way embassies operate, we have defense attachés in many of our embassies overseas. We have legal attachés that are associated with the FBI. Why not cyber attachés? Individuals who are familiar with the language of cyber, who are familiar with the attack space, and who can be a resource for the private sector to go to in the event of a problem and to help coordinate with governments overseas as to how we get these bad guys. Right now, when you go across our embassies overseas, they don't have the capability. I honestly think they try in many cases, but they don't have the capability. I think this is something that the State Department could lead. They could work closely with the FBI and the Defense Department to have cyber attachés overseas. If we're really going to spend money and we realize that we have to have cross-border initiatives, this would be a great way for the government to be a thought leader in the space of cybersecurity. Two more areas. The ninth area, Congress needs to reorganize itself to address cybersecurity. It's been interesting as the government has tried to go up to Capitol Hill to talk about the President's cyber initiative. There are multiple committees they need to sit down with, and many of you may know already that there's a joint economic committee that has existed in the past, which brought the leaders of the relevant parties and committees together to work on joint economic issues. It is time for that joint cyber committee to be formed with the Homeland community, with representation from Commerce, from Homeland, from Defense, from Intel, from Government Affairs or Government Reform. We need that joint committee today. And let me tell you why it's very important, because the administration is going up now trying to brief committees, multiple committees, and ultimately budget decisions need to be made. We're in the budget season now. Well, if we don't have a common view on this in Capitol Hill, we'll find that this initiative that the government has put together will likely fail or will not be adequately funded. That brings me to the final point, and that is where I started at the top, and that is we're at a time of transition. We will have a new president this time next year. This president has finally woken up and has established an initiative, and he deserves credit for that. But how are we going to maintain momentum into the next administration? In this case, I would call on all the remaining candidates in the field in their first decision directives. When a president comes in, they put together one of their first decision directives, a PDD or an NSPD or whatever it is, if you will, that organizational directive that says, this is how my NSC or HSC is going to be organized. Within whatever directive is signed off in the first days of the incoming president, there should be an individual anointed, if you will, who's going to be in charge of cybersecurity, who's going to be that government facilitator across the board, who can pick up whatever this government has, whatever this administration has put in place, and carry it forward. It doesn't mean that all the decisions need to be made in the opening days of the next presidency, but I call on Senator Obama's campaign, Senator Clinton's campaign, and Senator McCain's campaign to designate, to agree to designate that someone's going to be in charge of this issue when they come in office. If not, we will lose a year or so at least in trying to get our hands around this issue.